Hello and welcome to Wyrd Wessex. My name's Andy,
And my name's Craig.
and we have a guest with us today. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
I am Paul MacDonald, from the Scottish Big Cat research team, amongst other things.
So,
Welcome to the show.
yeah, thanks for coming on.
Cheers
Uh,
for having us.
we big cats keep cropping up in terms. I mean, I suppose that's why you've got a big cat research team. They keep cropping up, but on the show they keep cropping up. A lot of like the weird news stories we go through,
Yeah.
and we've talked about doing a big cats episode for ages.
Hmm.
Well, and actually on our YouTube channel, one of our listeners, Claire Mullin,
Yep,
she works up at the Cranach Centre, and she mentioned your name and said, if we want to talk about big cats, you were the guy to get on.
I got you. That's good stuff.
Yeah.
So there you go, Claire.
There's a
So
small world.
we have got a host of questions for you, but yeah, I mean, do you want to kick things off, Craig? Or
Yeah. So I thought the best place to start off with would probably be to say, how do we define a big cat?
Yeah, that's a fair question. There's actually several that come within our kind of remit or sphere of interest.
Yeah.
Primarily what would be recognised as non-native species, leopard and puma, and then we have the lynx, which certainly was a native species, and there's even reason to suggest they may not have left entirely. They're definitely of interest, especially now that we've got discussions on the reintroduction of them in Scotland. And we do have what's called Kellis cats, which are hybrids of Scottish wildcats and domestic cats. And these fellows can grow unusually large, 3 or 4 foot long in the body, which is capable of taking down a deer. So it's really the size of the cat that impacts the ecology and environment around us that's of interest. But primarily what would be traditionally seen as non-native species.
yeah, I mean, when it comes to I'm intrigued by the notion that like with the lynx that they'd never gone away. Because I mean, you've got in the New Forest down near me, you've got a couple of species that have turned up that like pine mines are the prime example.
Right.
So someone got one on camera, and then another one, and then some young, and
Yep.
they went from saying someone's let this pine mine go to actually we think this population has just stayed in the New Forest and we just didn't know about it until now.
Yes. Yep.
And I've I've had two possible sightings myself.
Right.
That I don't know. You always think, well, it could have been that. And one of them was what I thought was a lynx. I thought it's either a lynx or a whomping great big Maine Coon. It was,
Right.
and it was sitting like the other side of the field. But like I was in the car with my friend Amy. I was like, "Stop!
Yeah.
I've got to have a look at this." It was just lying down in this field,
Yeah.
but it had the tufts, and but yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. Amazing. Amazing.
So
That,
yeah, is I know a lot of them happened in the 80s, but what was the first sort of recorded big cat sighting in the UK or in Scotland, whatever you'd prefer to?
we have a newspaper article telling of an incident in Inverness-shire where this was 1923 or 4, I think, of a farmer trapping a lynx, what's described as a lynx, but there's also a description of a large brown cat that sounds more like a puma at the time. So we're not entirely sure what that might be. Like I say, it wasn't shot necessarily, or DNA evidence wasn't available at the
Yeah.
time. But that's one of the earliest. But we do have evidence as well of large estates having big cats as part of their private menageries in the 19th century. So I think this probably goes back a little further than we think, but certainly the idea of them being enough in terms of sustainable population certainly kickstarts with the Dangerous Wild Animals Act from 1976 and subsequent releases from there.
That's yeah, because I know there was when I was I've mentioned it on this podcast before, but I was walking. I used to live in Hertfordshire, and I was walking through Broxbourne Woods. And funny enough, one of my mum's friends had seen a big cat in Broxbourne Woods.
Right.
But I was walking along, and I did this double take, and I was like, you sort of look at something, and it's so ridiculous. You don't really think. You think, nah, it's not real. And you look
Mhm.
again, it's real. It was a mountain lion, and I sort of was like, what the. And didn't see the green mesh between us, and what it was
Uh-huh.
kind of a collection, it was some
Uh-huh.
house essentially, and he
Yeah.
had these two mountain lions in this big pen, and
Wow.
one of them was just lazing around. The other one's like the way they sort of keep pace with you when they're in a cage,
Yeah.
sort of just I want to eat you, that kind of look. But yeah, literally, my heart was in my throat.
It
But
would
yeah,
be.
I think there was a few people apparently back in the 70s and 80s that did have them in Broxbourne Woods around that area that I was
Right.
told. But
Right.
I know, yeah, as you say, the Dangerous sort of Animals Act kind of put paid to some of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, prior to 1976, there was no regulations at all. And you could buy up here in Scotland, you could go into a pet shop in Glasgow or Edinburgh, buy yourself a leopard or a puma and take it home.
That's madness, isn't it?
We had, yeah, we had a fellow tell us, oh yeah, he says, I remember, must have been late 60s, he says, seeing this lassie walking her two pet leopards down Princess Street Gardens, you know.
Mad.
And you can find footage also of this happening in London, folk walking their pet leopards and their pet pumas.
Yeah.
Became a
Yeah.
trendy pet, for those with a bit of cash.
We're
So
all.
I've read.
I was just going to say,
Focus.
we're all there debating that, like, whether we should keep, XL bullies and stuff like that. You can go back a few decades.
Exactly. And also, after the legislation came into force, obviously there were releases as a result of that. There's no question about that. Owners at that time have since come out admitting releases and a number of cats with it. We do track origin stories as well, and we map them. And you can overlay the origin stories perfectly with subsequent hotspots, which kind of backs itself up. Yeah, but what there has been since 1976 also, despite the law, of course, is an illicit trade in exotic species, which I think there always will be to some extent,
Yeah.
and that's always going to be difficult to police. And that brings about its own problems as well. And simple logistics and financial support of big cats is quite significant, really. They're obligate carnivores. They have to eat meat and a reasonable quantity of it daily. So just the upkeep of a cat, including your suitable enclosure, ideally, these are things that add up over time. And it's always been the easiest option, I think, for owners who've had a cat that's got a name, if it's a family pet also, and they don't want to necessarily put them down when they can't support them anymore. It's always been an option, in fact, to release them with the idea that they'll probably thrive, and they do.
And also, how are you going to, you've got a pet leopard or something, you haven't got a gun. How are you going to go and put it down? You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
exactly.
It's not going to let you bash it over the head.
Yeah, I wouldn't fancy my chances.
So, what is it that first drew yourself to big cats? Was it a personal experience?
It was absolutely. It was in the mid to late 80s, on the way to school on the train. I was raised in the West Highlands and went to school in Lochaber High School, which involved about a 35-mile trip to school and then back in the evening, bus and train. And it was on the what's now known as the Harry Potter Bridge to many, the Glenfinnan Viaduct on the West Highland line. And both my friend and myself sitting on the northern side of the train, and early morning sun was out and fully caught what appeared to be an adult leopard just slowly skulking away from the edge of the railway. So really quite close, a close sighting, which made it all the more unmistakable. Two of us couldn't speak. We looked at each other and said, after we'd lost sight of it, did you see that? Yeah, did you see that? yeah, it wasn't a dog, was it? No. It wasn't a deer, was it? No. It was a big cat, wasn't it? Yeah. And we just, like anyone who sees one in the wild in a country where you don't expect to see it, we honestly couldn't believe what we'd seen. But it was so close and so clear, it was absolutely undeniable. Um, and subsequently, you see little reports appear in newspapers of big cats being seen. And that really caught my attention more than anything, because you see one and you think, well, that's one, it's out there for whatever reason. But when you start to join the dots over time and see that, in fact, round the country in different regions altogether, there are big cats being seen as well, it makes you think, well, maybe it is a bigger picture, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, like a lot of the stuff we do on this podcast, funny for two people that do like a supernatural and folklore podcast, quite often we find ourselves sort of more on the skeptical side of things. But we've both
Yeah,
sort of said that with big cats, and I know I was just saying this the other day, like it's one of the ones I'm more inclined towards,
yep, yep.
I guess a lot of it for me is, sort of the evidence for it, the lack of evidence for it. What would you say is the best current evidence for the existence of big cats in this country?
A Really, the best current evidence is the collective evidence, which unfortunately isn't available on, one handy database online.
Yeah.
There are individuals and individual groups all throughout the UK doing their own research. We're all amateur in the sense that no one's professionally doing this, but we're also, loosely connected. So, we don't have all that database, all the physical evidence and the sighting evidence in one place. Saying that, we have been making efforts in Scotland to do that here. In 2019, I moved to the borders here in 2017, and a couple of years later, there was a local sighting. I decided to follow up on that, meet the witness, go looking for evidence myself, and we found some evidence, and that inspired me to at least look at the local areas around here, and the interest just expanded outwards from there. And I thought, yeah, it might just be possible to cover all of Scotland and start to map those sightings. I took this approach from my Army Reserve experience in mapping battle spaces, and thought I'd apply the same approach to big cat sightings, and it's been quite successful so far. And we now have a mapping database of over 1,400 pinpoints of credible sightings just in Scotland. And that allows us to track what's going on over time, to identify species, identify habitats, hotspots. So in terms of witness evidence, that's becoming quite significant in itself.
Do they tend to cluster where you'd expect them to cluster in terms of behaviour for big cats as well, like those
They,
pinpoints?
they absolutely do. We're seeing exactly the same correspondences of, the same habitats you'd expect. In fact, in South Africa and places where big cats, are naturalized. The same for puma. We're seeing the same type of habitats used, and the same for lynx. Lynx are deep forest cats, and invariably that's where they're being seen up here as well.
Well, that was always the argument for reintroduction if they're not here already. Was the that was the argument, wasn't it, against say wolves? Was the fact lynx they do tend to stick to deep forest. They're not going to be roaming across and eating out of bins in London,
Yeah, absolutely. There's been quite a bit of scaremongering, you could say, about
Yeah,
the idea of lynx being reintroduced, despite the fact that there's never been a single human impact of lynx. They are deep forest cats, but the scaremongering figures seem to come from the worst case scenario, which is figures from Norway, where livestock are impacted, reasonably, but then they farm quite differently in Norway. They put the sheep into the environment of the lynx, into the forests, and
yeah.
that's not the way sheep farmers work up here. Then there's literally a 40 times difference in the impact figures between putting your sheep in forest and not doing that and having them in pasture land.
So with the sort of cats that we know are potentially out there. Do you think that there's any chance they could have established a breeding group?
I would say yes, and fairly confidently, I would say yes on that. We certainly have evidence of that from sightings and mapping. They have been seen in pairs, and leopards, for example, are only together in pairs really quite infrequently, for maybe only a week to 2 weeks. During mating, the adults will be together, but they have been seen also. Mothers with cubs have been identified in different areas throughout the country as well. As well as that, the mapping starts to tell us what's going on with the timelines. And big cats typically live out 12 to 15 years in the wild. And we're seeing areas that are active with the same species type for 30, 40, and 50 years, which tells us that there's generational breeding going on, as well as the associated sightings with young as well.
So obviously, clearly it is something you're passionate about. So what does the idea of there being a big cat population mean? Well, firstly to you, and secondly as an environmental impact, for better or worse, on the UK. I mean, it's always been of my mind that, given the amount of deer that we've got, it's probably a good thing having some apex predators out there. But but yeah, what would you say that means to you and environmentally as well?
Yeah. I mean, it's quite a thought, really, for anyone, to think that we've got apex predators like leopards, pumas, and lynx out there in the wild. The thought of even, hiking across any mileage of hills or woodland, and it being in your head that there's a possibility you might even see one. That in itself is an exciting thing, and it's an exciting thing for people in South Africa for leopards, for North America, South America for puma, and for Europe and into Russia and so on for the lynx, that they can potentially expect to see one. So that adds a bit more local interest for when you're actually out there in the hills. And in terms of ecology, then they're helping us, and they're doing a good job in that sense. We don't have any other apex predators that way around other than ourselves. And they are being helpful towards reducing populations of rabbit and deer in a healthy way, because there are obviously associated problems if populations get out of control that way.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the other experience I had was I was walking through the woods with my uncle, and I remember seeing a deer in a tree, and it looked like it had been ripped up a bit.
All right, wow,
just hanging over a branch, and it must have been a good 15 feet up. And
wow,
my uncle
right.
just sort of assumed that someone had killed this deer and thrown it up there. It wasn't until I spoke to a colleague who worked for a bushcraft company, who one of his colleagues at the time said that they'd been in woods where there'd been a lot of big cat sightings, and they'd
Right.
found claw marks, they'd found footprints, and they had found a deer, or a couple of times they'd found deer up in trees. And I
Yeah,
didn't realise at the time, but I think it's a leopard that's a sort of indicator of,
yeah,
isn't it?
probably would. I mean, there's really only one type of animal does that, Foxes have not quite got the neck and leg strength to haul them up trees. They are capable of climbing trees, foxes, but they won't haul prey, at least their own body weight, up a tree. It's just not possible. We have had that in Scotland as well. We've had accounts of roe deer and sheep being found up trees. That's quite that's quite a significant marker of big cat activity, as well as the other markers you'd expect as well: scratchings on trees, and finding prints and finding the right type of associated kill evidence as well. Big cats do impact the large prey in certain ways, and there's telltale signs when you come across a fresh carcass for sure. And we do have evidence of that up here as well as prints and castings. So it does along with the witness sightings all add up.
So I don't know if it's because we knew this was coming up, and whether Andy will agree with this or not, but I've noticed an increase in headlines about big cats. But it could just be because we're conscious of it, that we're noticing it more.
Yep.
But either way, do you think that these sort of sensationalized headlines help or hinder a scientific sort of look into big cats?
I would say that depends very much on the integrity of the journalism involved.
Yeah.
We have had very, 100% factually sound articles done about our research and what's going on, and that's always great to see. You're not being misquoted. They're getting all the facts right, and that's helpful. That means we can get our name out as a point of contact, and that helps. Yeah, that helps us out massively when it's done well. The flip side of that, of course, is less than scrupulous journalism, where titles like beast and monster, are used to, and it does, it does present fear mongering, which is not helpful to what we're doing. Fear mongering towards these animals is not really justified when we don't have any impact on humans directly, other than the odd bit of livestock being taken. That's something that, if measures governmentally are to be brought in down the line, then compensation schemes for loss of livestock would naturally have to be thought about. But so these are manageable problems associated. The idea of them being beasts and that everyone should be scared, and they'll lock their doors at night and keep the pets in. That absolutely can be overboard, and we've seen it plenty in the past. Yeah,
I think I'm going to say we might be guilty of that. With our weird news section, we go for the sensationalized headlines.
I found a different paper for my one. I was going to not the mail anymore if I can get away with not using it.
But it does make you kind of second think our segment and whether we need to rethink what kind of articles we're using, because as you say, it's not necessarily helping the case.
Well, it depends. If you do it like us and find it 10 minutes before, but no, I mean that was, I always grew up with stories of the Beast of Bodmin Moor, so
yeah, of course. I mean, it's a catchy headline,
it's a great headline. Yeah,
it captures the imagination in that sense, and there's something about that sense of legend and sense of myth, in fact, that does come across with big cats, especially black leopards. They have an almost other world look to them, and they're awe-inspiring creatures by the nature of the way they move as well. There is something almost otherworldly that in that sense,
which is probably incidentally why people who let them go bought them in the first place, right?
No question. They've always been the coolest cats to own,
Right? Yeah, exactly.
So and for no other reason than that,
Uncle had that tattoo that everyone seems to have with a big cat down his arm. Like I remember having one on a jacket, like a black jacket, and
these were they were so cool. In fact, in the 40s, there were US military squadrons over here, based here, that would have big cats as pets. Some of them had pumas, some of them had black leopards, and of course, as soon as home came to the end of the Second World War, then everyone's going back home. What did they do with the big cats? It was known that they released them as well. There was even a case up in the very north of Scotland where there was a US Navy base active from 1962 to 1992 that had black leopards for mascots, and when they came to closing that base, it was the easiest thing in the world for them. They released them, and I think the earliest pinpoint we've got on our map in exactly the same area of a large black leopard is 1993. Corresponds exactly with those releases.
So
that's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think it matters for sort of the UK as a whole as to whether they're big cats or not? I mean, I've got my own opinions on it, obviously, but overall, why do you think it matters or should matter?
If we have established breeding populations, in living out in the wild, and that will continue to breed, then they're now becoming naturalized. They're now becoming a part of our environment. So realistically, this is a subject which should be taken seriously enough at governmental level. they have been officially, officially they haven't existed for the longest time. There have been efforts here and there to raise the subject in Parliament. I believe Alex Salmond actually raised the subject some decades ago in Westminster, and it wasn't. It was taken seriously by some and not so seriously by others. It was very much a mixed reaction. But where we're dealing with something that has an impact on our ecology, it does have an impact on our environment, then yeah, it should be taken seriously enough. So I think this is a time where we're starting to gather enough evidence in a scientific enough way, an objective enough way, and we have good solid physical evidence. There have been 4 separate incidents of positive DNA analysis confirming leopard in England. We don't have any Scottish DNA results yet, but I'm submitting some samples, in fact, in the next days to the labs in Edinburgh, and we're hopeful on that, because obviously we could add thousands more down the line to the witness mapping, but then that's still uncorroborated evidence. We still have to corroborate the witness sightings and statements with physical evidence, which is a long-term game because it's not an easy one by any means.
That's you see, I remember there was, I think it was Paradise Wildlife Park in Broxbourne. They used to sell tiger poo as a as like a deterrent for as a deterrent for cats coming into your garden. It was like a gimmicky thing.
Right.
And the little devil on my shoulder was like, get some and leave it in the woods. But like, now I know you're doing this serious work, I don't think in good conscience I could ever do that, It's interesting you say about people taking it seriously, and because essentially, like, I was doing a bit of research for this, and I came across a news article that was talking about a police force did actually take the unusual step of releasing, upon request, a bunch of like sightings, and they sort of passed it off as this, look, see, there's nothing confirmed. But out of like the 8 sightings that they had registered there that they brought out, 2 of them were explained away as mistake, and the other one was just didn't follow up. So like, it wasn't really proving anything on their part that as to them,
Yes, yeah. We haven't yet been able to tap into historic police accounts in Scotland, but we're quite keen to do that if it's possible down the line. But one of our team members was one of the founder members of the Scottish Big Cats Trust, which was established in 1990s and ran until 2005, and that was the first Scottish group, to be doing studies in this subject. And George Redpath was one of the founders of that, who was a policeman at the time. He was a policeman in Fife, which was quite an active area at the time, and still has active parts of it. And George, of course, was getting the reports in directly and following up. He was going out to farms and so on and finding the evidence, and it sparked his interest massively. And he's been, fascinated and done his own research ever since.
So, as far as the research goes, is there like a next step? Is there some other group that you'd like to see get involved, sort of like as a next level up from you guys?
We've already here started to make started to contact authorities and other organizations that could be helpful. The likes of organizations associated with road networks, with rail networks. These are organizations that have their own CCTV systems where there can be potential for evidence there, as well as impact and road traffic carcasses recovered. So it's helpful for us to link in with them and basically be a point of contact in the eventuality a carcass is recovered. At least they've got someone now they can come to. Yeah.
Isn't that one of the arguments people say though? Is like, where are the bodies?
It absolutely is, and it is one of those kind of mystery areas about it. There are numerous stories circulating about big cat carcass seen. Somebody reports it to somebody who wants to go and recover it. They go to recover it and it's gone. Sometimes there've been accounts of them being seen loaded into council vehicles and, whisked off. Are we dealing with a cover-up of some sort where it's
I was going to say maybe it's to stop fear mongering, sort of.
Yeah,
just
exactly, and that's quite understandable.
Yeah.
Not to raise public fear and alarm that, somebody's just knocked over stone dead a full-grown adult puma in your local vicinity. Of course, that's limiting fear mongering.
Yeah.
And it would be understandable. What would be a shame is if that carcass disappears without an opportunity to actually analyze it and know at least the age of the animal, identify exactly the species to give an idea of even where it could have come from, originated in terms of import. It seems there's been lost opportunities for studying carcasses. Carcasses have also been known of big cats in terms of sadly having been shot by farmers and gamekeepers in the past. We have numerous accounts of this in Scotland. We've made efforts to try and exhume carcasses in places where they've been known. More often than not, the communications go radio silent after a while, and we're not being allowed, to approach or know exactly where the carcasses have been buried. But there have been accounts of black leopard and of lynx being shot, and invariably they're buried. They go to ground immediately for fear of any repercussions that might have an effect on their firearms ownership after that.
Well, there's the other thing is, again, we were chatting about this the other day with Craig. When cats are ill, when they're dying, I'm talking domestic cats, they don't tend to stick around somewhere visible. They'll go and hide somewhere. They'll go under a nook, under a tree. They'll hide in a bush, and if that's where they die, that's probably a good reason why we don't see them, because...
Yeah. I mean, take into account how many millions of deer there are throughout the country. How often have you stumbled across a carcass of a deer that's died of natural causes?
That's the thing, isn't it? It's
probably never, I don't think.
No. Yeah. One of my a guy I taught archery to years ago, a guy called Mike. He was in the police over in, well, it was Rhodesia at the time, sort of quite an old boy, and he was in the bush all the time, like doing counterinsurgency stuff. Yeah. And he said he'd seen evidence of leopard kills. He'd seen tracks.
Yeah.
And at one point he found a fresh dead, I think it was baboon, and that had been at his throat done.
Yeah.
And, it was warm, and so he ran because he knew there was going to be somewhere above him.
He might be dinner.
Yeah. He never saw a leopard.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like that walking through the woods. Well, why don't we see them more? It's like, this is somewhere where leopards live, and he didn't see one this whole time there.
Absolutely. We have been told by trackers in South Africa and naturalists in India that you could live your life with a healthy population knowingly around you and not see them. These are some of the most elusive creatures in the world by their own nature. There have been big cat species that haven't been seen for years, going into decades, and have actually been classed as extinct. And there's been a couple of accounts of this quite recently. One wasn't seen for 30 years, one wasn't seen for 50 years, and then it's seen again in a locality where only that big cat has ever existed. And it couldn't have been reintroduced from anywhere else. So the simple fact is, they can exist in your environment for decades without being seen.
Well, that's the thing, sort of you always think of these, and again, going back to that sensationalist kind of beasts, man-eaters, but if a big cat's a man-eater, it's there's something usually wrong with it, right?
Yes.
They tend to work towards not going anywhere near people.
Yes. Big cats becoming man-eaters seems to be where you have several problems. You have a lack of natural prey, and we certainly have no shortage of that anywhere in the UK, and certainly in Scotland in the wilds. There's never been a an issue in that sense. Also, where you get too much competition amongst big cats. There's too many of them in that sense, and the competition for prey leading to lack of it. Don't believe we have enough big cats, in fact, for them to be too competitive in any local area in the UK as well. And so we don't have anything to fear in that sense.
Well, yeah, I mean, just going to the Highlands, I mean, last time I was in Dalwhinnie, there was up in the edge of the Cairngorms, there was just deer, but like you wouldn't see the deer carcasses as much, but you'd see like the bones now and then and shed antlers every, just the sheer amount of red deer up there was insane.
Yes.
I was just, sort of marveling at that and thinking, because there's nothing around to eat them for the most part,
Yeah, absolutely. And big cats will, for the most part, actually survive on small prey, rabbits, squirrels, birds, and they'll ambush them quite happily. But where there is a deer population, then absolutely that helps sustain them quite naturally. And in the same way we see in South Africa and other countries, the big cats go where the prey goes. And so where you have, big prey, then we see them following the same animal paths and tracks, just the same.
Yeah, I mean that's interesting as well, because down here and over in Hertfordshire, where I'm originally from, so in Dorset now, a lot of the big cat sightings are quite close in. Down here, you've got loads of sika deer, whereas over in Hertfordshire, it's pretty much all muntjac. And they all tend to stick around where those deer populations are as well. So, that's something to lend to it.
Easy pickings.
What's that?
Said easy pickings.
Easy pickings.
You keep with the food.
Yeah, exactly.
Would you say there's any new technologies that might be helpful? I mean, I know you mentioned DNA analysis. I know that's making leaps and bounds. Are there any new technologies that might be helpful in finding like conclusive evidence?
Yeah, definitely. There's new things coming, to light all the time. Of course, drone capabilities. Drones with thermal capabilities could be certainly useful at night for tracking in hot spots or known areas, areas where you get fresh sightings and you're following up with field work and you're trying to see if that cat's still in the area. Absolutely, would be very handy. Our problem with that is we are amateur by the way of being self-funded as well. So we don't have deep pockets when it comes to it, and these are still relatively pricey bits of kit. So night vision and thermal kit, that's all good. eDNA is an interesting development now as well. Environment where you can pick up on environmental DNA and essentially be able to pick up on DNA from a print in itself. So that's becoming interesting tech that I think is just becoming available commercially, and that's something we're going to look into as well.
So where do you see the debate in the UK going in the next few years? Are you positive about where things are going?
It's going to be a long-term game, I think, for any of us. I don't think it's going to happen overnight, that suddenly there's going to be protection and preservation measures on black leopards and pumas and throughout the UK. That's a bit much to expect.
Yes.
Obviously, there's going to be plenty of debate had before, and that debate has to be backed up with the evidence, and that we are in the earliest stages of that game, you could say. So I think that's just where we're at with it. We still see ourselves in early days of long-term measures going into place.
So lastly for me, is there any official way, like sort of recognized official way of reporting sightings, and what's the best evidence that gathered? Obviously, a lot of the video footage is often quite shaky and blurred. Is there stuff like descriptions, time, dates, that sort of stuff? Like what's the best way to report it if anyone has a story, has a sighting, and what is the best evidence they can possibly get if they've just seen one?
There's quite a network now online of localized Facebook groups, which is great. It's really given rise to a lot more localized interest in the subject and providing places for witnesses to report. So I would advise to anyone to report in, find your localized big cat Facebook group. There will be a localized or a regional group out there for you. And yeah, that's probably the best place to report it. In Scotland here, our team, we run the big cat sightings in Scotland Facebook group. Anyone's welcome to report any Scottish sightings through that, either confidentially by PM or they can share on the group. Something though we do have to be careful with though is confidentiality of active areas. Certain farmers and gamekeepers have made themselves known to us and said, yep, we'll shoot them. And some have said, yep, we already have and would shoot more. And so we do have to protect active areas in that sense as well. So we don't make our mapping available online. It's not open source. That's strictly circulated amongst our team members. It has to be in the interests of the cats, you know. But yeah, I would say for any witnesses, find your local Facebook group, find your local researcher online and report in that way. There likely will be someone or some group making similar efforts and mapping and building the bigger picture. And that's the important thing over time, is not just telling someone else, but helping build a bigger map and a bigger evidence base.
I've got one more question, which we can always cut as well. This is just me personally asking, so if you don't want it to go out, that's fine. But you you've mentioned a couple of times about farmers and things that have admitted shooting and at least hiding the carcasses because they're worried about prosecution. But if we don't necessarily have any backing to say that they're actually out there, would they be prosecuted for that?
It seems to be a bit of a grey area, because these are not officially out there recognised by either Scottish or UK government. Then there's no protection measures clearly. But then again, no one has leopard or puma or lynx on their shotgun certificate or firearms license. So yeah, it's often just the fear of prosecution after the fact, after they've shot one. They tend to keep quiet about it. We've heard of them being incinerated. We've heard of them more often being buried. So it's seemingly a bit of a grey area at the moment. But in terms of our efforts, everything we're doing is in the interest of the animals because we see them as being beneficial for the ecology. We see them as adding to diversity of wildlife throughout the UK. They're fascinating creatures in themselves as well, you know. So definitely worth further study, worth professional study over time as well.
Kind of puts me in mind of, there's a podcast called The Wild with Chris Morgan, I think is the host. And it's a bit like a wildlife documentary, but in podcast form. I think he specializes in bears, if I remember rightly. And he had something, I think it was wolves somewhere, and there was like the locals that were fearing these wolves, and then he kind of was in this location watching them, and he handed the binoculars to this lady and she starts watching and it kind of changed her opinion because she's watching them play and kind of interact with each other. Her opinion of them turned around. There
is another excellent podcast in the UK, Big Cat Conversations. That's hosted and run by Rick Minter, who's been involved in this subject for some decades now. And he very much knows his stuff and has direct interviews with witnesses, as well as discussions with experts, international experts on big cats. And that's probably one of the best online resources, in fact, in the UK on the subject that way.
That's interesting. I spent a bit of time with the Scottish GWCT, sort of the Game Wildlife Conservancy Trust up there. My ex used to work with them. When she was up there, I was sort of helping them out. And they were just like radio tracking black grouse, but I kind of really wish I'd have asked them, you know, because they said they had a couple of the people, the researchers going out said had seen things killed like sheep and deer, And it's like, they look like something big, they didn't know whether some
Yeah.
loose dog had got them or something, but
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
yeah,
We've started making efforts now of getting ourselves out there a little more as a point of contact. And
yeah,
for the past 2 years, we've had a public outreach stand at the Scottish Game Fair, Scone Palace. We'll be
oh,
doing
yeah,
that
yeah,
again
yeah,
this year, yeah. And yeah, so these organisations are there, and it's a great opportunity for us to just approach them and just ask their views. And it's interesting because even in the sphere of all forms of outdoor work, you get folk that have never seen them in their life and just don't believe they're out there.
yeah.
You get folk that have seen them that want to see them protected, and you get folk that have never even heard of the subject. What, big cats in the wild? You're joking, and they just never heard it's a thing. So it's interesting. There's a huge spectrum of reactions out there as to them existing in the first place.
I mean, I know people will say it's because they're a predator, it's different, and they're big because it's different. But I'd argue they make less negative impact than say like herbivorous species,
Mm,
like
mm,
that would be non-native. Like you look at the damage muntjac deer do. They breed all
yeah,
year round. It's
yeah,
they can really wreck a place. But
yes,
to people that have said, "Oh, we couldn't have those over here because it wouldn't work because they're not native," it's like, well, we got populations of wallabies, we got populations of parakeets living
mm,
wild, in the UK.
yes, yes.
You know, yeah, it can work.
Yes, yeah, and it becomes more a question of, well, we've not got a choice anymore
Yeah,
when species become, naturalized and in numbers enough that that's going to continue, and eradication is no longer, a feasible option.
yeah.
Bear in mind, these are the most elusive creatures in the world, and tracking them down in the first place is a difficult thing to do. We can't be expected to get Attenborough level footage and images, because his team go and spend weeks in the wild recovering that 10 out of 10 footage.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of professional efforts required to do that. And to date, no one has gone full time in this subject. I don't know if anyone ever will, but no one's done that yet to date.
Um,
Been decades. Our mapping goes back 75 years
Yeah.
for sightings, and in all of that time, there's not been one professional effort spending weeks in the field to do that. We do have plans, in fact, with our research team to secure funding and make a month-long expedition covering several hotspots simultaneously. It is possible to do, but obviously requires a bit of backing and support, and just requires dedicated heads to get out there and do that and recover the good stuff.
I've got to ask then, is there anywhere that if people want to, they can donate towards that effort or?
We do have a GoFundMe going just to fund our Scottish Game Fair stand, because it's not that cheap. And
Yeah.
again, we're self-funded, so we've managed to do that the past couple of years. If folk got to the Big Cat Sightings in Scotland Facebook group, they'll be able to find that. In terms of UK efforts, again, at the moment, there is no UK organisation where you can donate to help the cause, sort of thing. We're still in early days yet, and we're fairly cohesive in Scotland as researchers. We could say we have over 70 members of our research team located all throughout Scotland, and when a fresh sighting comes in, sometimes that's within minutes of a sighting. I'll then get on to the relevant regional team and say, right, Fife team, who can we get out here to do some field work and meet up with a witness in the next hour or in the next 24 hours and do some field work in search of prints, in search of evidence. That's been helpful. That's been a good approach to date that seems to be working. But there's not as yet a similar UK base. But we can see things going towards that in future.
Fantastic. Yeah, have you got anything else, Craig?
No, it just occurred to me. I had mentioned to you when we were waiting to do the conversation that I had that story from the other day, which was just a bit weird.
Oh yeah. Go on, tell the story.
I'll just mention it just for the sakes of listeners and watchers, was that I'm currently selling a van for my father-in-law, and someone turned up to take a look at it the other day. And our slogan, by the way, Paul, is at the end of the podcast, we end with "Stay weird." And this person turned up to look at the van wearing a T-shirt that said "Stay weird," and I was like, "That's kind of weird."
Yeah.
So I was like, "What's that from? Is that from something?" Thinking maybe we'd accidentally picked it up from somewhere else. Oh, we found it in a charity shop. Don't know what it's about. Anyway, we stood around for a little while chatting. Conversation kind of moved on, and then they mentioned these two teens that were sat behind us, kind of rapping quite some crude lyrics to some rap music behind us. And this lady goes, "Oh, well, there's probably not much to do around being in the village. I grew up somewhere like this, and the only thing that I had to do was go out looking for big cats."
Right.
I went, hang on a minute. And yeah, it's just like this really weird coincidence that they wore that T-shirt and they used to go out looking for big cats.
Fantastic. Well, funnily enough, probably see a shiny thing or two behind me here, because I make custom swords and knives. That's my day job. And I used to make Athame daggers for a shop in Edinburgh on the high street called the Wyrd Shop. There's another weird connection.
Love it.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
I'll have to get you on my other podcast to talk about your armory stuff.
Yeah, no problem.
At some point. Yeah. We'll do a swap over and do that one.
Yeah, that can be a bit weird too.
Usually is with Craig.
That's fine. So Andy, usually when we've got a guest on, you've got a little feature that you like to run with them, right?
I do. So yeah, we like to find out someone's Florida man story, because the good folk of Florida are a weird bunch, and to say the least. So all I'm going to need is the month and the day of your birth. So yeah, just day and month, and I'm going to find out what your corresponding Florida man story is.
Got you. That would be 17th of September. And
Okay.
I do have a good friend from Florida. He was over staying with us for a couple of days recently, so I can confirm they are a bit weird in Florida.
Okay, so I'm just going to type in 17th of September, Florida man. And your Florida man headline is, there we go. Oh, there's two. You get a double whammy. So the first one is Florida man charged with accidentally shooting bear that was trying to eat his trash. Which, isn't too weird. But yeah, apparently I don't know how you accidentally shoot a bear that's shooting at it. It's kind of like gamekeepers and big cats. I don't know. Oh, there you go. Castellano, which is the guy's name, grabbed his .22 caliber rifle and fired what was meant to be a warning shot, but accidentally struck the bear.
Yeah, because you really wouldn't want to be hitting a bear with a 2-2.
You know what I mean? Yeah, it's
going to annoy it, really.
Oh, this is the good one. This is the good one. So, annoyingly, it's telling me the content isn't available in my region. So I'm just going to read the headline. Florida man steals alligator from golf course, tries teaching it a lesson by throwing it on the roof of a bar. And there is your Florida man story. I need to find that one somewhere. That sounds brilliant.
You got just Google the headline.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to Google the headline quick.
I'm sure you can find it with a Google.
CBS doesn't
liking the apex predator connections though. That's okay.
Yeah. Kind of weird.
Kind of weird.
Well, there you go. The it's the Indian Express. So here we go. Florida man steals alligator from mini golf course, stomps on it to teach it a lesson. After stealing the reptile, he's then seen trying to throw the alligator onto a roof of a nearby shop and then throwing it by its tail. While most run in the opposite direction of seeing the alligator, a man in Florida US not only ventured near it but also stole one. Yes, you read it right. It's interestingly written, this headline. And there's a paywall there, so I don't think we're meant to read this whole thing. Essentially, the Florida man stole an alligator to teach it. I don't know what lesson he was trying to teach it. Not to be on a golf course, I don't know.
It's quite an impressive story. But my only question about that is how sober or otherwise was he at the time?
You know,
that's where my curiosity goes.
Sort of, maybe he wanted to be Florida's Steve Irwin. I don't know, but
Maybe.
no, he cared about the crocodiles at least. But yeah, exactly. Yeah, you got to be on something, right? To just go and steal an alligator. It was a young one, apparently, but still, it's
Yeah.
It's that was always the stories in America, wasn't it? Yeah, it was here we get big cats being released in America. It was flushed an alligator down my toilet.
Yeah.
Horror movies and the turtles were anything to go by.
Aye. That's true.
I think there was something like that in Bristol or somewhere at some point, wasn't there? There were rumours of a crocodile or an alligator or something, I think.
Was there?
Yeah,
Wow.
I think I remember hearing that. I know there were snapping turtles in a pond near me at when I grew up. There was little turtles in there that.
That's scary enough.
Yeah, I know, right? Again, you don't want to put your finger in there.
We had that on Weird News when we had Patrick on recently.
We did, yeah.
They found was that a snapping turtle in Cumbria?
Possibly.
They're really spiky looking. They look dinosaur like, don't they?
They look dangerous, yeah.
And they can bite your finger off.
Yeah.
They found one in Cumbria not too long ago.
Right. Yeah. Wow.
Oh, what we got you here, actually, one more question I wanted to ask was, obviously, you seem to be of the opinion that big cats are quite, they're probably quite beneficial to the environment in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
What's your thoughts on rewilding in general? Like, not just sort of big cats, but other predators, other historical creatures. Because I mean, wild boar have done quite well, for example.
Yes. I mean, that is another good example. Wild boar are also officially not supposed to be out there, but there's no shortage of stories. There's no shortage of them turning up in different areas. There's been talk, obviously, of wolf, of bear, even in Scotland. Clearly, these are stepping up somewhat, in terms of the potential threat to mankind as well. Wolves being pack animals in that sense, in the wild, can present a bit more of a threat to humans. So that's where there is more of a reality of danger to human life, in the wild. And I believe that big cats are not quite at that level where there's an immediate threat first to human life. There's certainly a threat to wildlife potentially, but that is something that's manageable. I think when you step up to wolves and bears that certainly used to be here, are they a good idea to bring back? Oh, there's a bit more relevant fear associated with that to consider first.
I mean, I love wolves, I really do. But
they're beautiful, yeah.
Don't think they, as much as I'd love to see them, I'd love to hear them. Like I used to be in a reenactment group, Regia Anglorum.
Oh yeah.
We I don't know if you've ever been down to Wickhurst.
No.
So their hall in Kent is right next to a wildlife park, and there's something magical about sitting in that long hall around the fire, drinking your mead, drinking your beer, and hearing wolves howl. Something stirs,
Sure.
But I don't think they should necessarily be reintroduced into the wild here, just because of the reasons you said. And also, like I said earlier, like you release them up in Scotland, if they've got a mind to it, they're so far travelled. They'd be down in, they'd be in Edinburgh, or they'd go further south, and they'd end up just on the outskirts of a city eating out of bins,
Yes,
taking sheep, taking cattle, which in turn would mean the farmers would start trying to campaign to shoot them, and it just wouldn't work. Which is why I've been thinking for a while lynx would be a better option, because they can take deer, and they're a lot more elusive. They're not going to cross paths, and they're probably get themselves shot by a farmer as much.
There has actually, terms of talking about the kind of relative ideas of reintroduction, there is a form of release that we're aware of, certainly with lynx, and there was also an event with puma where it's not been escaping. They're very rarely ever escapees. That rarely happens. It's invariably it's all intentional releases. But there's a form of intentional release that is interesting to see, and that's intentional guerrilla rewilding, intentional efforts of multiple animals at a time, with just purely the intent of rewilding. And this has mostly been with lynx, but we have been able to determine several efforts that have been made of intentional guerrilla rewilding, and naturally the sightings predominate in those areas of that species.
So they want to rewild gorillas. Sorry.
I think down here there's been guerrilla rewilding of beavers.
Oh, yes,
but they've turned up. Yeah,
yes, that's gone on in Scotland before.
Yeah.
Also. There have been an official program, but that has gone on as well.
Yeah.
So when we put our mind to it and you do it right, you can do it. You know, I mean, you look at red kite, for example. At one point, there were 15 breeding pairs in the country, and now they're everywhere. You know,
Yeah.
You go on the road on the motorway near Woking, and like you'll see more than 15 in the sky at the same time. You know,
Yes, well,
it's just incredible.
We once drove all the way to Scotland to see red kites.
Really?
Now they fly around our back garden now.
Yeah.
Down the centre.
Wow. Yeah, they're beautiful, beautiful birds. We have them locally here in the borders.
Yeah. And they've released eagles down in Dorset now. There's some eagles that sort of fly around the New Forest and over by the Isle of Purbeck. Friend of mine saw one flying over Knowlton Rings the other day.
Wow.
That's been really successful.
Amazing, yeah. Amazing. Yeah.
Shall we do weird news?
We can do some weird news.
So you're welcome to stick around for this. I don't know if you've got any weird news to share.
Sure.
But we decided to theme ours a bit today, didn't we, actually? Although you've probably heard these before. Do you want to go first, Craig?
I can theme it, or I can go with something a bit more off of topic if you like. It's up to you. Do you want to stick with big cats? I do have a big cat headline.
I've also got a big cat headline, but I've got another one as well. So go on, you go first.
Well, I'll go with a non-big cat one, shall I?
Go for it.
Just because unless Paul wants to keep talking about big cats.
Could be here all night, lads.
Yeah. So I have a headline that is horror film come to life. Goblins terrorize Bulawayo family. Children beaten and food vanishes.
Goblins.
We've not done goblins before.
I think that's a new one for weird news.
Yeah, that's what it stood out to me. So I'll try and summarize it a bit. So a family of 3 children from Nguagwe, is it, in North Bulawayo?
He always
probably
picks
terrible. Yeah. Their lives, It says that their lives look like they were cast in part of a horror flick. The children aged 13, 12, and 8, along with their elderly grandparents, found themselves at the mercy of unseen and mischievous entities suspected to be goblins. Their once peaceful household has transformed into a realm of fear and confusion. Strange occurrences have become routine. Objects vanish without a trace. Unexplained noises reverberate through the walls, and the children have reported being physically assaulted by invisible forces. Doors and windows behave autonomously, lights flicker, and even food disappears while cooking. The only other bit I'm going to go into, because this is where it took a turn for me. So the ordeal began in November last year, and since then it's only escalated. And then there's a quote here that says, "We don't know what to do anymore. It started last November. One morning, our children woke up with their heads shaved. We thought it was a one-time thing. The next day, our youngest child woke up in the middle of the night screaming. He'd been stabbed in the leg with a knife.
Wow.
He also woke up with his head shaved again. We're all terrified and completely clueless what's happening," said a family member.
Wow.
Yeah, it goes on for a bit after that. Basically, the children move to live with someone else for a while, and they say it follows them there. I'll be honest.
Children.
That's I think one of the children might have some issues.
No, Mum. Honestly, it was the goblin.
Maybe just taking family pranking a wee bit too far.
I reckon so.
It just took a turn when it gets to he was stabbed in the leg. Like, oh, come on now.
Pretty wild, right now.
So,
I'm not sure if you heard of the goblin reintroduction program that was in Scotland years ago. They had it, but they couldn't find the appropriate underground cave network, I think, and it collapsed.
What are you talking about? You got loads of caves in Edinburgh, you know? Nothing down there.
We did do the Falkirk Triangle recently, and there was some creatures in a cave up by Edinburgh somewhere.
Right.
We mentioned then. I think they were described as goblin-like, so they're around.
Oh, that might be the Goblin Hall. Aye, which is just outside Edinburgh. And it's got a tradition of little people that way. We've got traditions of little people in many places in Scotland that way. Aye.
Yeah.
I feel like another episode coming up. So my original one was going to be a Mirror headline because I found it in the Mirror instead of the Mail, so I decided to go with that, which was a panther-like big cat spotted prowling through the UK farmer's field, which is in Worcestershire. I'm guessing you might have heard this one already.
I have, yeah.
Yeah, I think it rings a bell.
Yeah, but there was a paw print found as well, which looks really interesting. But I'm not going to go with that. I'm going to go.
I think that wasn't there a photograph, but it was quite distant. It wasn't.
Yeah, it was a very distant photograph. But again, if you're on the road, it's kind of hard to get beyond a black speck.
I think I saw that one, and I think I saw there was a photograph of the print.
Yeah.
As well, which unfortunately looked rather canine.
It does look a bit canine, doesn't it?
There is actually a phenomenon of black foxes. You know, there are black foxes in the country. They're quite rare, but they are seen on occasion, and there's certainly been cases of mistaken identity. And I think when you come up with clearly a canine print and a fuzzy faraway photograph, it might suggest that's what that might be. No.
My uncle had a black fox tail, actually. He had a bunch of foxtails. So one of my earliest memories was going out with him, and we'd take the dogs out, but apparently bad men used to want to come and scare the dogs, so I'd have to stand guard for them and let him know if they were coming. I was poaching. I was a lookout for a poacher. And occasionally you'd get foxes. It was mainly for like rabbit and pheasant and stuff like that, but occasionally you'd get foxes. Like his pride, and he had this big shed, and he had a load of foxtails in it, and there was right at the back there was a black fox.
Black one. Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, unfortunately it does. You're right. It does look a bit canine. So am I right in thinking when the claws are that clearly defined? Because obviously cats have retractable claws, whereas dogs don't. So they tend to define the claws a little bit more on the paw.
They do tend to. Cats will extend their claws in softer terrain, so mud or sand. They can extend the claws, but then it's a different type of claw. It's more a kind of sharp triangular impression you get, and dogs are much like a finger, a kind of very blunted kind of type.
Which is what these look like.
Radio.
Well, I'm glad I got another one then. It kind of ties in with us talking about the fear of people and their sheep being attacked by big cats. Sheep believed to be responsible for the deaths of a couple in New Zealand. An elderly couple are believed to have been killed by a sheep. Their bodies were found in a paddock. The couple, both in their early 80s, were found dead by their son at their rural property in Waitakere. There you go. I've got one that I can't pronounce. Which is in Auckland on early Thursday morning. He'd gone to check on the pair after failing from hearing from them. The police suspect a ram was responsible for their deaths. When officers arrived at the farm, the ram reportedly confronted them, and they were forced to kill the animal.
Wow.
What they think happened was that the gentleman had gone to check on it. The ram attacked and killed him, and then when his wife went there, it killed her as well. So yeah, it's very sad, but kind of it's it's definitely weird. You don't really you hear about farmers being killed by their cows, occasionally their pigs.
Yeah.
I've never heard of someone being killed by a sheep before.
Wasn't that a film? There was a
Yeah,
film
that
from
Sean Bean, wasn't it? He got chased off the cliff.
No, there was a film about the horror film about a killer sheep in New Zealand.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
like the killer sheep or something.
Well, I was gonna say if it wasn't already, I can see this story becoming a horror film in like 10 years' time or something.
I think it might have just been called like Black Sheep.
I think it was Black Sheep.
I think you're right. There's also supposed to be a Scottish movie coming out soon about killer midges, which really can't fail to be an amazing movie. Even if it's on the lowest budget in the world, it has to be an amazing movie. It's just about killer midges.
That's funny because there was another weird headline I saw that was about the irony of a town that's been plagued by midges, and it was the town of Midgham.
No. Imagine. Well, they brought it on themselves, really, didn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it basically just a wildlife an animal expert said getting smashed up against a wall or something, people get injured. It could definitely cause some serious injuries, but you really don't tend to see deaths associated with sheep.
Yeah.
But if it repeatedly charged at them, and he went on to describe what you occasionally get as rogue rams that either hadn't socialised with humans or had a massive build-up of testosterone. Said these rams could cause serious damage even if they didn't appear to have horns, as the base of the horns were still there. So yeah, I think maybe the horns have been taken off. But yeah, so yeah, that was it was a short one, but it's yeah, pretty grim, but again, very unusual.
A lot of animal related today with
Goblins.
Well, they're just thinking with the Florida Man stories and then the weird.
Yeah, it was all bears.
It's very focused. So that headline, I won't read the story, but the other headline I was going to do was zoo owner says big cats are living wild in the UK and he's seen one. And it's an article about a guy called Ben Mee who runs Dartmoor Zoo.
Yeah.
That was
I think it was his zoo that there was a Hollywood movie based on his zoo of buying the zoo and running the
That's
zoo.
right, yeah.
I knew one of the big cat keepers at Paradise Park actually when I lived there, and he was also the opinion that there are probably big cats out in the wild in the UK.
Yeah, it's always helpful when to the subject in general, where you get clearly very credible witnesses. Like zookeepers.
Yeah, exactly.
And we have had, in fact, we've had South African trackers actually in Scotland seeing big cats, and just there's no question they know immediately when they see a leopard or when they see a lynx. And we've had police, military personnel, gamekeepers, forestry workers, folk who work outdoors day in, day out, and they know without question what they're seeing. So credible witnesses like that, yes, it certainly helps.
That's a good place to wrap up, I think. But
I think so.
Yeah.
A credible place.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you for your time this evening. And for
Yeah, really appreciate it. Thank you for coming on.
Absolute pleasure, guys. Thanks very much for having us on.
But yeah, hopefully catch up with you again at some point. And yeah, I'm sure I'll see you on Craig's podcast as well at some point. But yeah, thank you very much. Been yeah, I feel a little bit more convinced now. As I said, it was one of the things that I'd always been leaning towards more out of everything that we cover. And yeah, I think I lean a little bit more that way now as well. So
yeah, good stuff.
I'd normally ask you to do some social plugs at this point, but we've kind of done those earlier in the episode. So what I'll do is I'll pop some links underneath the video and on the podcast so people can find all the things you've spoken about.
That'd be perfect.
If people want to find us, we are at Wyrd Wessex on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Or you can email us wyrdwessex@pm.me.
Until next time, stay weird.
And me.